Please welcome moderator Sonya Murphy, the Digital Chamber, and panelists Elizabeth Duchek, Bitdeer, James Cheng, Canaan, and Jonathan Brightbill, U.S. Department of Energy.
Well, thank you everyone for coming today. I'm Sonya Murphy. I'm a Senior Policy Associate. I work for the Digital Power Network. We're an affiliate of the Digital Chamber. We are the largest coalition of Bitcoin miners, digital infrastructure providers, but I'll kick it over to our panelists today to let them introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Duchek. I am the Associate Director of Government Relations for Bitdeer.
Hello, everyone. My name is James Cheng. I'm the CFO of Canaan. Canaan is a manufacturer and also a miner in this space. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Brightbill. I am the General Counsel of the United States Department of Energy.
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess to lay the groundwork for what we're going to be talking about today, Bitcoin mining is a very flexible load. It is an interruptible operation, so Bitcoin miners can turn off their operations at a moment's notice. So that allows for a very flexible involvement with the grid and really interesting grid and energy innovation with that. So Elizabeth, from the operator side, from Bitdeer's perspective, what does this flexibility actually look like when you are operating and engaging in demand response and curtailment programs?
Yeah, like you said, it's all about the speed with which we can scale down our energy use. Whether it's a time of an ice storm or a heat wave, we are able to quickly scale down and sometimes completely shut off our operations lest we overload the energy grid. So, for example, to give some real-life examples, we have a facility in Rockdale, Texas, and last summer we logged 155 hours of curtailment, which translates to a reduction in grid demand of about 46 million kilowatt hours. And this is something that no other industry can replicate. The speed and the flexibility is something that is unique to Bitcoin mining. I would also note that this is all done on a voluntary basis. Bitdeer is committed to being a responsible energy partner, and so that grid participation is a core operating principle of ours as opposed to a compliance afterthought.
Yeah, thank you. And so, yes, we often do talk about Bitcoin miners as being heavily involved in the grid, but they're also often looking into off-grid solutions where they can generate or consume electricity generated right at the source. I know that's something that Canaan has been looking into and doing. And so, as they are, what are the benefits for Bitcoin miners to locate directly at the source and go off-grid rather than having to go through interconnection queues and direct to the grid there?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin mining is a very interesting business. We consume the energy, but in the past, a lot of people question about this and say, why you consume a lot of energy but generate what kind of value? I started my career from Mars, and I do chocolate planning. We never complain about consumers who eat more chocolate. So I think it's important for the grid to have something very certain to consume the electricity, to consume the energy as a cornerstone to make sure the grid runs like a demand and supply balance. And for Canaan, we also think about the decentralization for Bitcoin is very important. Starting from day one, when in 2013, our founder NG Zhang created the first ASIC mining machine. His purpose is to deliver the mining machine to everywhere in the globe, to everybody, and make sure Bitcoin is decentralized. Today, ASIC mining machine is more used for institutional miners, like big institutions, like listed companies, but we still consider individuals have the right to use Bitcoin to protect their wealth, and also use the Bitcoin mining machine to heat their house, even the bedrooms. So we created some quiet mining machines, home mining machines for individual consumers to let them use that and to let them contribute a little bit to the network and make sure the decentralization of Bitcoin getting deeper and deeper, and also the adoption of Bitcoin gets more and more population into the whole Bitcoin network. I think that's the purpose of us to create this kind of innovative products. And it's sold quite well in the United States, especially the northern locations like Minneapolis or Chicago. That must be very cold there. Yeah, so that's something I would like to share.
Yeah, thank you. And so looking at our current regulatory environment when we are trying to interconnect data centers into the grid and just plan for this new emerging load, our current system is really just planned for firm loads like an AI hyperscaler. And so, Jonathan, when we are thinking about how to plan the grid for this emerging load, how should we be thinking about flexible computing differently than a traditional AI data center?
Well, thank you very much to the Digital Chamber for the opportunity to be on the panel here today. So I think that it is an evolving philosophy and an evolving understanding of government regulators about how Bitcoin mining and that energy load operates. I imagine most people in the room are not strangers to the fact that a few years ago, both in Washington as well as out in states like New York and elsewhere, people were viewing the power consumption that came from Bitcoin mining in much the same way that they viewed, say, generation from hyperscalers, generation from a manufacturing facility. And the reality is that it works very differently, as people in this room know, and that the marginal cost of power is a huge consideration as to whether or not the Bitcoin miner will operate. And so, and the ability to rapidly curtail as well as expand puts Bitcoin miners in a relatively unique position to be able to access what would otherwise be stranded power around the grid. And I think that there is an increasing understanding of that, particularly now as part of this administration and with the leadership of the White House crypto advisors and others, and trying to get out to try now how to figure out how we address this differently. And so the Secretary sent what is called a 403 notice to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in October. One of those items that we're seeking feedback for is how do we figure out how to treat and regulate hybrid load, where you have generation and then the load itself differently than in the past. And so, you know, I think at some level it's still a little bit on the Bitcoin community to figure out how it is that it kind of can further integrate into supporting the broader load network, because right now it operates and takes advantage of stranded megawatts, so to speak. And how do we actually create a partnership and a regulatory regime that better allows that that capacity to use stranded megawatts at all kinds of different facilities in a way to, frankly, spread out fixed costs, reduced fixed costs of transmission and other things, so that ultimately we lower the cost of electricity for ratepayers, which is a super high priority of President Trump and Secretary Wright, and consistent with the ratepayer protection plan that we put out last week.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of potential there to lower costs and utilize flexible loads. Zooming out a bit, thinking about energy infrastructure and grid investment, data centers, Bitcoin miners are major investors in the grid, in our energy systems. But there is a rising narrative that Bitcoin miners and data centers can be strains on local grids. So Elizabeth, from your perspective, how are Bitcoin miners and data centers going into communities and helping invest in local infrastructure and promote community development?
Yeah, like you said, the narrative of Bitcoin miners being a strain on the grid is a narrative that we have been challenging for quite some time now. And it's something that we're seeing happen in real time with our planned site in Ohio that's supposed to be operational later this year. We're in consistent communication with regulators, utility providers, other local stakeholders to ensure that we are not to ensure that we are an asset to the community, not a burden to the community. One of the ways we do that is by undergoing a dynamic load study, which assesses our energy use and the impact on the grid. And that gives local stakeholders data confirming what we already know, that we are not a burden to the grid. And that proves that we are a reliable energy partner to a community well before we connect to the grid.
Yeah, thank you. And just the investment in the community is so important, and financing is often a challenge for major infrastructure and energy projects where they can't quite get the financing if they, or plan their project adequately if they don't have a demander of that power. And so that is a very common challenge. And so Jonathan, how can flexible loads be a solution to that problem and fit into that dynamic?
I think the big thing that they can contribute, if we can get the economics right, and that's one of the challenges, I think, in having made this flexible load something that really is a reality yet today on the grids, but it's something we're looking very closely at how we facilitate, is by being a flexible load, it enables us to unlock the power that would otherwise be stranded and that could otherwise be used for various assets and ramped up. I mean, we have right now in this country an unfortunately large number of gigawatts of electric power that is scheduled to come off the grid for economic reasons, but not what I will call true economic reasons, but because of economic regulatory constructs, and frankly, the proliferation of non-dispatchable intermittents onto the grid structure that has undercut the ability for reliable, dispatchable electricity to operate as long and consistently as necessary so that the marginal income is sufficient to offset the fixed costs to make the asset worthy and of keeping online as a general matter. And so one of the things that I think that there's a lot of potential for the Bitcoin community to look at is how can it partner with dispatchable assets that may be having economic issues in the same way that Bitcoin miners were very early to the idea of wind and solar is intermittent. Wind and solar has transmission constraints, and there are barriers to the use of that power. So we're going to locate our load with wind and solar and take advantage of what would otherwise be stranded electricity, wasted electricity, to be able to take advantage of our scaling. The same potential exists for other form of what I'll call stranded, and in this case, regulatorily stranded electric megawatts that could be produced by our existing fleet of dispatchable, large load, coal-fired and gas-fired assets, but that have found themselves now kind of economically on the outside looking in from a regulatory constraints perspective. And if that code can be cracked, there's a potential from a regulatory perspective, for this administration to try to facilitate making that happen. And frankly, it needs to happen. There's too much power on power plants that have a decade or more of life left in them that are coming off the grid right now and scheduled to come off the grid. We've got to fix that. It is at a crisis level.
Yeah, thank you. There's definitely a lot of potential for partnerships there. I want to focus a little bit more on the technology aspects. We know that we've seen a lot of advancements in Bitcoin mining, computing, energy technology in recent years from both Canaan and Bitdeer, which has been great to see. And so, James, looking ahead, as we are seeing these massive improvements in efficiency for these technologies, how do you see the relationship between the computing industry, the Bitcoin mining industry, changing with the power sector?
Yeah, I think it's now an ecosystem combining these two businesses together. We see a lot of Bitcoin miners, especially the listed companies, they have already started to build up their data centers for AI cloud computing. I think this trend will not end here because we are talking about the future AI business is actually the agriculture for AI agent. They don't eat wheat and rice, they eat tokens, and the tokens are based on the energy. So they actually need a lot of food in future if they actually being involved in a lot of our activities. So we consider that the long-term future is great for cloud computing HPC data centers. But in short term, if you would like to invest a data center, it's extremely difficult because you don't have any orders from the giant internet companies. They don't buy from small scale companies. They just look at your site and say your infrastructure is not qualified. So you should start from a Bitcoin mining and get certain returns, like 2 years or 3 years. You collect all the cash back, and at that time, same thing happens. Like you have already accumulated decent energy sources, something like beyond 150 megawatts, and at that time you have a kind of you can attract a lot of hyperscalers come to your sites and sign contracts with you. So look to me, more companies already turn into HPC data center, but I still see a lot of potential data center companies started from Bitcoin mining and with certain returns back in coming years, and then they have potential to become data centers. So I think Bitcoin mining can be considered an early stage business for data center, and it helped the whole ecosystem make money from the beginning and make money for the long term. So I personally feel very optimistic about Bitcoin mining because it helped the current value generation for Bitcoin. It also helped the future value generation for AI.
Yeah, thank you. No, Bitcoin miners are definitely playing a very important role in supporting broader AI development. Now, focusing more on national security, data centers, energy security, and just the broader energy sector are definitely being folded into national security conversations. And right now, the US is in a global compute race for Bitcoin mining, AI computing. We're focusing more on grid reliability and building out domestic energy production. So, Jonathan, where do you see this large-scale flexible computing infrastructure fitting into the broader energy security conversation?
Well, again, consistent with my earlier comments, I see a lot of opportunity for partnership between scalable load of the kind that Bitcoin requires and what I will call locked up, stranded electric generation. We have a ton of it in this country. And so, and there are a variety of reasons for that. Some of them are transmission related. Some of them are regulatory paradigm related. One of the things on the transmission side is actually last week, the Department of Energy announced a $1.9 billion notice of funding opportunity for what we call our Spark initiative, which seeks for opportunities for the department to fund the overhaul of transmission infrastructure and grid improvements and other things that technologically could enable even more use of flexible load, such as Bitcoin and other things. But as a general matter, in terms of advancing our overall energy posture and security, that's $1.9 billion is, will allow a lot of reconductoring of of existing transmission corridors, so you can improve the amount of throughput that you're getting there and enhance the opportunity ultimately to share power across the breadth of the network and to eliminate some of these bottlenecks.
Yeah, thank you. And thinking more about national security, supply chain is at the center of that, and especially for the computing sector, we have a very global supply chain, and Bitcoin mining relies on a global supply chain. So, James, what should policymakers better understand about the supply chain for Bitcoin mining, and what are the opportunities to onshore that to the US, or are there vulnerabilities there?
Yeah, I think United States now is the biggest market for Bitcoin mining. I think US miners take about more than 40% global hash rate, contributes a lot to the network. So it's an important market. That's why last year we set up the manufacturing, actually assembling in California, United States. But we are facing two other problems because the cost here is not the same compared to Asia, compared to Malaysia. It's not that competitive. And also, at the same time, we are still paying tariff for all the components. Like aluminum, we have to pay extra tariff for those raw material and components. I think we made the finished goods here. We pay the tax, we pay the tariff, we pay the labor here, we increase the employment here. But for the components part, I think United States would like to think, the policymakers should think about this, especially for the raw materials, they basically should not charge a lot of tariff, because for the manufacturing business as an accountant, frankly speaking, I said raw materials, usually it's very, competitive price in Asia side. If you continue to charge tariff to those raw materials, how can the manufacturing continue to make the America great again? It's kind of difficult for us. And we are a global operation. We have factories in Malaysia, in also China, in United States, and we can ship from every factory to United States, depending on the tariff and also the assembly cost here. So we can compare and we can do that calculation in a kind of, very efficient way. So I think policymakers should think about the whole process and try to help the manufacturers here. We would like to invest more, not only in California, but also Texas and Pennsylvania. We can do more, but we need the tariff of the raw material and the components going down. I think that's something I would like to voice out.
Yeah, thank you. So Elizabeth, looking ahead, do you see the physical infrastructure behind mining operations serving a broader strategic value, like we've talked about with demand response or supporting AI computing? And what would be the risks if we don't capitalize on that value?
Short answer, yes, there is absolutely a strategic value. A longer answer, Bitcoin mining plays a key role in grid stabilization, whether it is scaling back in times of peak demand or, as Jonathan was mentioning, the use of excess energy that would otherwise be stranded. There's an important, Bitcoin mining is an important piece to that puzzle. Furthermore, Bitcoin mining, the physical infrastructure behind it is a building block for AI development in the future. The high energy use from Bitcoin mining lays the groundwork and encourages, it creates demand to encourage further infrastructure investments for AI development down the road. As far as the risks of not leveraging Bitcoin mining to its full potential, I see it as twofold. One, we risk more of the status quo, more of an aging energy infrastructure that is struggling to meet the demands of a modern world. And then second, from a more geopolitical standpoint, you mentioned earlier we're in a bit of an AI arms race, so to speak. And because Bitcoin mining plays an important foundational role in AI development, it is paramount that we capitalize on that. Our competitive adversaries are making rapid developments in AI, and the United States cannot afford to fall behind.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess
may I address the comment here? So, on the issue of tariffs, right? So when you're sitting in the chairs that I'm currently occupying with others, right? One of the common issues we're hearing is tariff for me, but not for thee, right? Which is, so to your comment about, you are very cost constrained. You're trying to locate your manufacturing operations here in the United States, and so, a tariff is helpful to you. Except we don't want tariffs of the raw materials that then make it more expensive. And unquestionably, we are going through a time of transition. We've had more now than 3 decades of largely asymmetrical trade where the United States was nominally, or at least as it was sold to the American people, engaged in free trade, when the reality was that we've been engaged in asymmetrical trade where we didn't have tariffs, but all kinds of trading partners around the world did. And the president has a clear vision to move us away from that and to move us to a place where we can reshore not only the manufacturing, but as part of that, ultimately, we are investing in critical minerals and other things here in the United States. Another thing we announced last week was a $500 million NOFO on critical minerals to try to encourage investment now, domestic investment here in the United States, to expand raw materials availability that would go not only for batteries, but also into chips and other things for advanced technologies. And so understand and appreciate that, as we pass through this period of transition, that people can look at individual tariffs and say, I wish they were not there. But ultimately, the United States has the highest environmental standards in the world, the highest labor standards in the world, the highest human rights standards in the world. And around the world, we are competing against countries that a big part of why they are less expensive is because they don't have all of those things, and we do here in the United States. And so part of having the tariffs in order to reshore all that is in some ways a recognition and a defense of our enlightened United States policies as it relates to the environment, to human rights, to labor, and to housing, and to all other things that are expensive. It doesn't come without cost here, and part of the tariff regime is designed to recognize that and, frankly, facilitate that over the long term.
Yeah, thank you. So to all the panelists, we can go down the line, but what do you see as the biggest barrier today to American Bitcoin mining, computing, or just energy in general? Any policies or any narratives that you see out there?
One thing that I am hearing from our site managers, as some of you know, Bitdeer has locations across the United States in Texas, Tennessee, Washington State, soon to be Ohio. And one thing I'm hearing from our site managers is a patchwork regulatory system. So if we want grid stabilization in all 50 states, we need a regulatory framework that can support it in all 50 states. And what I'm hearing from our site managers is there are application processes that include vague timelines and inconsistent standards, and it makes it challenging for long-term investment. So there are certainly a lot of policy barriers, but a consistent, streamlined regulatory framework with predictable timelines would make long-term investment and planning much easier.
Thank you.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Elizabeth because I think our industry is still very new, still only 1 decade time, and I think policymakers need time to understand more about our industry to make all the policy, ready to support the industry. I think step by step, if everybody playing a kind of role in this industry can voice out to the policymakers and let people understand our business is really helpful for the energy development. And I think sooner or later, all the policy bottlenecks will be solved. So personally, I don't feel pessimistic at all. I feel United States is still the place to invest heavily from our perspective, because the legal environment, the policy environment is still so consistent and developing. So it looks to us, we will continue to invest more here instead of other locations.
So from the perspective of a regulator who believes in crypto and is part of the most pro-crypto administration that we've had in the White House, I think the biggest challenge as we think about the energy policy is really the economics and the consistency of the economics and how that relates to a industry excuse me, that operates on a multi-decadal scale of investment. So how is it that we figure out we've got to get to a level of maturation in the industry, excuse me, where the economics can begin to support long-term planning for this level of investment over time. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is figuring out where Bitcoin and those electricity costs, what is the threshold whereby they can
more consistently enter into longer-term power purchasing agreements and the like that facilitate the scale of investment and the term of investment that's necessary for the build-out of more and more infrastructure. And if you can get to that point, I think that's the point at which the Bitcoin mining industry transcends being one that can help merely just mitigate marginal cost and help to maximize the potential of the existing infrastructure that we have and be a source of economic support for additional build out of the energy infrastructure that we need.
Thank you, and we're about at time, but thank you everyone for attending, and hope everyone enjoys the rest of today's programming. Thank you.